I've always been the kind of guy who checks the locks twice before bed. Not because I'm anxious, exactly, I just like things to add up. If a door's locked, I want to have felt the deadbolt turn under my own hand, not just remember locking it that morning. Renee used to tease me about it. She'd catch me standing at the front door at 11 at night, hand on the knob, and she'd say, "You already did that, babe," and I'd say, "I know, and do it anyway. It's a small thing. It didn't used to mean anything." We bought the house 2 years ago, a fixer-upper from the 70s, out on a street with big maples and cracked sidewalks and a lot of families who'd been there longer than we had. It needed work. The kitchen was still avocado green when we moved in. The wiring in the garage was a fire hazard, and the basement had only ever been half-finished, one side drywalled, into an office for me, the other side left as raw concrete with the washer-dryer, and about a decade of somebody else's forgotten storage. I do freelance design work from home, so the basement office made sense. Renee works part-time at a dental practice a few miles away. Our daughter Mia was 6 when we moved in, 8 now, and she'd claimed the upstairs bedroom with the window seat before we'd even finished unloading the truck. I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand what normal looked like before any of this started. I want you to understand that I am not someone who sees things that aren't there. I balance my own checkbook. I still use a paper calendar. If anything, I'm the most boring possible narrator for a story like this, and I think that matters because for a long time, longer than it should have, I explained every single piece of it away. It started on a Saturday. Renee had taken Mia to a 9 a.m. soccer game across town, which meant I had the house to myself, which meant laundry day. I don't mind being alone in the house. I like the quiet, honestly. I went downstairs around 10 with a full basket balanced on my hip, flicked on the bare bulb over the utility sink, and started sorting whites from colors on the folding table Renee's dad had built us as a housewarming gift. The basement floor is bare concrete on the storage side, and it collects dust fast, especially near the far wall by the old coal chute door. A small rectangular hatch maybe 2 feet by 3 painted over so many times, it looked fused shut. Tucked into the corner behind some shelving, I'd never given it a second thought. The home inspector had noted it as non-functional, sealed, and that had been enough for me. That morning, though, I noticed the dust near the sink was disturbed. Not smeared, not scuffed, disturbed in a specific way, in a line. I stood there with a wet sock in my hand for a second, just looking at it, the way you look at something that doesn't immediately parse. Then I set the basket down and crouched. Footprints. Bare feet, human-shaped, walking in a fairly straight line from the corner near the coal chute toward the bottom of the stairs. Smaller than mine. I wear a 12, but wider across than Renee's narrow feet, and definitely not the tiny prints of an 8-year-old. I touched one of them, pressed my finger into the dust beside it to compare depth, like some idiot forensic scientist on a Saturday morning. It was real. Whatever had made it had weight. It wasn't a trick of the light or a smear from a dropped rag. My first thought, and I remember this clearly because I've replayed it so many times since, wasn't fear. It was irritation almost. That specific, very human reaction of, okay, who did this and why didn't they tell me? I thought about the exterminator who'd come by 2 weeks earlier for the ant problem in the kitchen. But he'd worn boots, I was pretty sure. I thought about Renee, but she'd been at work all week and hadn't mentioned going down there. I thought absurdly about whether Mia had somehow snuck down without me hearing. She wasn't supposed to be in the basement alone because of the old fuse box with the exposed wiring near the stairs, but kids do things. Except these prints were too big for her, not close. I stood there a while longer than I probably needed to, staring at a line of footprints in the dust like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. Eventually, I did what I think most people would do. I told myself there was a boring explanation I just hadn't thought of yet, grabbed the broom, swept the dust flat, and went back to my laundry. I didn't mention it to Renee that day. When she and Mia got home, Mia sticky with orange slices and victorious about her team's 3-1 win, the house filled up with normal noise again, backpacks and cleats, and Mia narrating the entire game in real time. And the footprints slid to the back of my mind the way odd little things do when life keeps moving. It came back up 4 days later, and only because I brought it up myself, half as a joke. We were doing dishes together after dinner, Mia upstairs doing homework, and I said, "Hey, weird thing, I found footprints in the basement dust the other day. bare feet, not mine, not yours. I said it lightly, grinning a little, already building toward the punchline. Maybe we've got a raccoon that's figured out how to walk upright. Renee laughed, the real kind, scrubbing a pan. A raccoon in dress shoes. Barefoot raccoon, I said, very civilized. Did you check if anything's missing? No. I just swept it up and did the wash. Even as I said it out loud, it sounded stupider than it had in my head. Why hadn't I taken a picture? Why had I just swept it away like a stain? She didn't seem worried, and honestly in the moment, neither was I, not really. It felt like exactly the kind of story you tell at dinner and forget by dessert. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. The first response from both of us was disbelief or at least dismissal. That mattered later. It made me second-guess myself for a lot longer than I should have. The next real event happened about a week after that. I went down to grab a box of Mia's old toys. She'd been asking about a stuffed rabbit she thought we'd donated by mistake, and I noticed the storage boxes had been moved, not dramatically. Nothing was knocked over or spilled, but I'm particular about how I stack things. I always have been. Heavy boxes on the bottom, labeled sides facing out, lighter boxes with the kids' stuff on top so Renee or I don't have to dig. One box, the one marked MIA35YRS in Renee's handwriting, had been on top for as long as I could remember. It was now on the bottom of a different stack entirely, wedged under two boxes of old textbooks. I stood there running through it logically. Had I moved it myself and forgotten? Possible, but unlikely. I don't forget things like that. Had Renee gone looking for something? I asked her that evening. I haven't been in the basement in weeks, she said, not even looking up from her phone. Why, no reason, I said. Just thought maybe you grabbed something. That night I lay in bed doing the thing my brain does when something doesn't add up, running the layout of the basement over and over in my head, trying to logic my way to an answer, the mental equivalent of checking a lock I'd already checked. I fell asleep unsatisfied and woke up the same way. A few days after that came the smell. I went down to switch a load of laundry and caught it as soon as I hit the bottom step. Not rotten, not dangerous smelling, just off. Sweat, maybe, or the smell of a gym bag left zipped up too long in a hot car. I checked the hamper first, thinking it was just an overdue load of Mia's soccer clothes, but that wasn't it. The smell got stronger as I moved toward the far corner of the basement, the corner with the coal chute door. I stood in front of that little painted hatch for a long moment. I genuinely never opened it. The home inspector's note had been enough for me 2 years ago, and since then it had just been part of the wall, something I walked past 100 times without seeing. I grabbed a flashlight from the shelf and checked around the water heater, behind the shelving units, even pulled back an old tarp covering some leftover flooring samples. Nothing. No dead animal, no leak, nothing obviously wrong. But the smell lingered right there in that corner, stubborn and faint. I told myself I'd look at the coal chute door properly later. I didn't, not yet. I had a client deadline that week, and it's strange, looking back, how easily later swallowed up something that in hindsight should have sent me straight for a crowbar. Over the next 2 weeks, small things kept happening, none of them alarming on their own. All of them together started to sand down the edge of my certainty that everything had a boring explanation. I noticed a box of granola bars in the pantry had fewer bars in it than it should have. I actually counted 6, when I was sure there'd been at least 10 2 days earlier. I asked Mia if she'd been sneaking snacks, and she gave me the flat, offended look of an 8-year-old being falsely accused. I don't even like the peanut butter ones, she said, which fair, they were the peanut butter ones. Renee backed her up, said she hadn't noticed Mia near the pantry more than usual. Then there was the shirt. I found one of my old flannels, a faded red and black one I was fairly sure I'd donated to Goodwill months earlier during a closet purge, folded neatly on top of the dryer. Not tossed there. Folded, the way Renee folds laundry, in thirds with the sleeves tucked. I picked it up and something about it felt wrong before I could even articulate why. It didn't smell like our detergent. It smelled like nothing, almost, or like a closet that isn't opened often. Is this yours? I asked Renee, holding it up. She frowned at it. That's not even your style, and I've never seen it before in my life. It doesn't smell like our stuff. I stood there holding a shirt that apparently belonged to neither of us, folded on our dryer in our basement. I didn't say much about it out loud. I remember forcing a laugh, saying something like, Must have grabbed the wrong bag at Goodwill, even though I hadn't been to Goodwill in months, but it sat with me. Somebody else's shirt in my house, folded like someone had been doing laundry down there and simply forgot to take it with them. Around the same time, Mia started saying she didn't like going up to her room. Her bedroom sits above the section of the basement near the coal chute. I hadn't thought about that overlap until she brought it up. She said she could hear scratching in the wall at night, like a mouse, but slower. I went in and checked, ran my hand along the baseboard, pressed my ear to the drywall like that would tell me anything. Nothing. I told her it was probably a mouse. She didn't look convinced, and honestly neither was I, but probably a mouse is the kind of answer that lets both of you go back to sleep. And then there was Scout. Scout is our lab, 13 years old, gray around the muzzle, the kind of dog who sleeps 20 hours a day and barks maybe twice a year. He used to like the basement stairs. He'd flop down at the top of them sometimes, just to be near me while I worked. Sometime during those 2 weeks, he stopped. He wouldn't go past the kitchen doorway that led to the basement stairs anymore. If I tried to coax him down with a treat, he'd plant his feet and growl, low, from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound I'd genuinely never heard him make before. I started watching him more than I probably should have the dog as an early warning system, which sounds ridiculous to say out loud, but by that point I was taking every scrap of evidence I could get, even four-legged ones. I want to be clear about what finally tipped me from mildly unsettled into actually doing something, because it wasn't any single event. It was sitting on the couch one night after Renee and Mia had gone to bed, pulling out my phone and typing out a list in the Notes app just to see it all in one place. Footprints in the dust, boxes moved, smell near coal chute, granola bars missing. Unknown flannel shirt folded, Mia hearing scratching in the wall, Scout refusing the basement. 7 lines, written out like that, in a plain white list on a glowing screen at 11 at night. It stopped being a collection of odd little household mysteries and started looking like a pattern. My stomach did something unpleasant. I sat there a long time just looking at it. I decided not to tell Renee everything, not yet. I told myself it was because I didn't want to scare her before I had real proof, that I'd rather come to her with something concrete than a list of vague anxieties that could still, technically, all be coincidence. Looking back, I think it was more than that. I think some part of me needed to carry it alone for a while, needed to feel like I was handling it like a rational adult, instead of a guy losing his grip on his own house. It was a mistake, I know that now. It isolated me right when I needed someone else's eyes on this the most. What I did instead was order a trail camera online, the cheap kind hunters use, motion-activated, infrared for night vision, syncs to an app on your phone. It arrived 2 days later. I set it up in the basement, pointed at the corner by the coal chute, and I hid it inside an old empty speaker cabinet we'd never gotten rid of, angling the lens through a gap in the fabric grille so it wouldn't be obvious to anyone down there. Then I checked the app every morning before Renee woke up, coffee in hand, standing at the kitchen counter scrolling through a night's worth of nothing. For 4 days, that's exactly what it was. Nothing, me doing laundry. Scout once poking his head around the doorway at the top of the stairs and immediately retreating. I started to feel foolish. I started rehearsing, in my head, the version of this where I tell Renee, I bought a hunting camera to spy on our own basement over a shirt and some missing granola bars, and she looks at me like I need to see someone. Then, on the 5th night, the camera caught something. I woke up around 3 in the morning for no reason I could identify, not a noise, not a dream I could remember, just an unpleasant, restless kind of awake. I reached for my phone out of habit and saw a notification sitting there from hours earlier. Motion detected, 1:41 a.m. I want to describe what it felt like opening that clip, because I think about it a lot. There's a specific sinking sensation that comes before you even see the thing you're afraid of. Your body knows before your eyes confirm it. My thumb hovered over the notification for a second too long. The footage was dark, grainy, lit only in that flat gray infrared way trail cameras render everything. For the first few seconds it was just the basement corner, empty, the coal chute door a pale rectangle in the wall, then a shape moved into frame from that direction. A person. Thin, a little hunched, wearing dark clothes that didn't quite fit right, too loose in some places, too short in others, like they'd been pulled together from whatever was available. They moved carefully, not stumbling around in the dark like a stranger would, but stepping around the edge of the shelving unit with the specific, practiced ease of someone who already knew exactly where everything was. They crouched near our storage boxes, opened the flaps of one, seemed to look through it for a moment, and then froze. Head tilted very slightly, the way you'd tilt your head to listen for something. Held that pose for 3-4 seconds. Then rose and moved back toward the coal chute corner, and the clip ended. My hands were shaking by the time it finished. Not a metaphor, I could see them shaking, holding the phone, watching my own thumb tremble against the screen. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my throat. There's a specific kind of fear that comes from having a suspicion confirmed instead of disproven, and it's worse than not knowing. Somehow it's worse. I didn't call the police right away. I want to explain that because I know how it sounds. It was the middle of the night. The footage was grainy enough that I genuinely worried they wouldn't take it seriously, wouldn't send anyone out for a shadowy figure in a basement with no visible break-in. And more than anything, I did not want to leave Renee and Mia alone upstairs while officers combed through the basement, and I didn't want to wake either of them into that kind of panic without any kind of plan in place. So instead, I did something considerably less rational. I got up, grabbed the aluminum bat we kept by the closet for exactly this kind of hypothetical, and went downstairs myself. I want to be honest, that was not a smart decision. I'm a list maker, a plan-first kind of person, and here I was heading toward a basement where I'd just watched a stranger walk through my family's belongings, armed with nothing but a little league bat and pure adrenaline. But fear does something to the part of your brain that's supposed to stop you from doing things like that. The basement was empty, quiet, cold, the hum of the water heater the only sound. I checked behind the shelving, behind the water heater, in every corner the flashlight could reach. Nothing, no one. Then I saw it. The coal chute door, the one that was supposedly painted shut, that I'd never once opened in 2 years of living here, was cracked open. Not wide, just a sliver, maybe half an inch, with a scattering of fresh paint chips on the concrete floor beneath it, like something had forced it from the inside. I stood in front of that little door for a long time before I touched it. When I finally pried it open the rest of the way, the hinges gave with a dry, reluctant creak, and I understood, looking at it properly for the first time, that the paint had only ever been cosmetic. Someone had painted over working hinges decades ago, and enough force from the right angle would still open it, force someone had clearly applied, more than once, judging by the paint chips. Behind it wasn't the simple exterior chute I'd assumed it was. My flashlight beam disappeared into a narrow crawl space running along the foundation, low enough that a person would have to crouch, extending further than my light could reach. I didn't go in. I want to be clear about that. Whatever adrenaline had carried me down the stairs, with a bat in hand, ran out right at the threshold of that hole in my wall. I stood there and shone the light into the dark for maybe 30 seconds, feeling the cold, slightly damp air drift out of it against my face, and then I backed away. I closed the door as best I could, it didn't latch properly anymore, and dragged our heaviest dresser in front of it, breathing hard from the effort, and from something that wasn't effort at all. Then I went back upstairs and sat on the couch until the sky started to lighten, watching the basement door like it might open on its own. I told Renee everything the next morning. All of it, the footprints from weeks earlier, the boxes, the smell, the shirt, and finally the footage, which I made her watch on my phone at the kitchen table while Mia ate cereal in the next room, blissfully unaware. I watched her face change while she watched it, disbelief sliding into something colder, something scared in real time. "We're calling the police," she said, before the clip even finished playing a second time. "Today, right now." We talked through the rest of it over coffee we barely touched, whether to get a locksmith, whether to stay in the house at all for a few nights. In the end we agreed, police first today, no more waiting. 2 officers came out that afternoon. They watched the footage twice, asked reasonable questions. When had we noticed the footprints? Had anything been taken? Did we know of any workers or contractors who'd had access to the basement, and then went down themselves to look at the coal chute? What they found in that crawlspace confirmed everything and somehow made it worse. Flattened cardboard laid out in a rough rectangle, like bedding, a few empty food wrappers, a plastic water bottle half full, Someone had been living, at least part-time, in the space behind my basement wall. But the crawl space didn't dead end at the foundation the way you'd expect. One of the officers, shining his light further in than I dared to go, called back that it kept going, connected, it looked like, to some kind of larger tunnel running beneath the street itself. Older infrastructure, he guessed. Storm drainage, maybe, or something built alongside a lot of the older houses in the neighborhood decades ago, mostly forgotten and unmapped by current utility records. He said it wasn't unheard of in this part of the city, not something they could fully explore that day without proper equipment and more manpower, but that it explained a lot. They recommended I seal the coal chute permanently, with something more than paint this time, install a security system, and change every lock in the house in case whoever this was had ever gotten a key made or found another way to access the house directly. Not just the crawl space. They took a full report but were straightforward with me, finding one specific person who had access to an underground tunnel system, someone who clearly knew that system well, was not going to be simple. I remember standing in the driveway after they left, watching their cruiser pull away and feeling a strange, useless kind of relief that we finally had a name for the fear, even without a face to put to it. And dread that the name came with an entire hidden world running underneath a street I'd walked down 1,000 times without knowing it was there. The next stretch of time was consumed by making the house feel like ours again, or trying to. I hired someone to seal the coal chute with metal plating, bolted through the foundation, not just wood and paint this time. I had a full security system installed, cameras on the basement stairs, the coal chute corner, both exterior doors, motion lights out back. I changed every lock in the house myself over the course of a weekend, methodically, the way I do everything, laying the old hardware out on a towel in the garage like evidence. I started sleeping badly during this stretch, and it didn't get better once the physical work was done. I'd wake at the smallest sounds, the furnace kicking on, the house settling in that way old houses do, and lie there in the dark, convinced for a full minute that I was hearing footsteps before my brain caught up and told me it wasn't. Renee started worrying about me almost as much as about the intruder, gently pointing out more than once that I looked exhausted, that I flinched at things that used to be background noise. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't just the danger that had gotten under my skin. It was not being able to trust my own house anymore, a place that's supposed to be the one space in the world where you don't have to be on guard. Mia started asking to sleep with her door open and the hallway light on, something she hadn't needed since she was 5. Scout still wouldn't go near the basement door, even weeks after the coal chute was sealed with steel plate and bolts, which unsettled me more than I let on. I'd hoped sealing it would fix something in him too, the way it was supposed to fix something in me. It didn't. About a week after the sealing was finished, nothing happened. No footprints, no camera alerts, no missing food. I let myself relax, incrementally, day by day, allowed myself to believe it might actually be over, that the police visit and the metal plate and the new locks had scared whoever it was off for good. I was wrong, obviously, or there wouldn't be much of a story left to tell. About 10 days after things had gone quiet, Scout woke me at 4 in the morning with a bark I'd never heard from him before, sharp, continuous, urgent, nothing like his lazy warning at a passing car. I was up and moving before I was fully conscious, grabbing my phone and pulling up the security app before I'd even made it to the hallway. That had become a habit over the past few weeks, checking the cameras before doing anything else, and it probably saved me a lot of wasted panic that morning, or added to it, depending on how you look at it. The basement camera showed nothing. Empty still, the coal chute corner exactly as it should be, the plating undisturbed. But when I flipped to the back door camera, the one covering the door from the kitchen to the backyard, I saw it standing open. Not broken, not forced. Just open, the way a door looks when someone has walked out through it moments before. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. I checked Mia's room first, heart in my throat the entire way down the hall, and found her exactly as she should be, asleep, one arm flung over her stuffed rabbit, completely undisturbed. That relief lasted about 4 seconds before the rest of it hit me. I walked through the house with Scout pressed against my leg the whole way, checking room by room, and found small things wrong. The junk drawer in the kitchen had been gone through, not emptied, just disturbed. like someone had been looking for something specific and hadn't found it. My laptop, which I distinctly remembered closing the night before, sat open on the kitchen counter, the screen still glowing faintly in standby. And on the kitchen table sat one of Mia's stuffed animals, a floppy elephant that lived on a shelf in the living room, placed there like someone had paused to pick it up and look at it before setting it down. I want to try to describe what that felt like, because it was a different kind of fear than the footprints in the basement dust had been. That first fear was strange, disorienting, easy to explain away. This was violation, plain and simple, the knowledge that a stranger had been inside the actual living space of our home, walking past my sleeping daughter's door, while all three of us slept a few feet away, unaware. It's one thing to have a scary basement. It's another thing entirely to realize the basement was never the whole problem. We called the police again immediately. This time, given a break-in through what looked like a properly locked, undamaged door, they took it more seriously than the first report. One of the responding officers suggested, carefully, that whoever this was either had a key or had learned to bypass the lock somehow. I told him I'd changed every lock myself only weeks earlier. He didn't have a good answer for that, and neither did I. And the unspoken implication sat in the room with us, that whoever this was had either genuine skill with locks or had been watching closely enough, patiently enough to learn our new routines and find whatever small gap we'd missed. That was the point where I stopped waiting for the police to hand me an explanation and started trying to build one myself. I understood rationally that their job was the immediate crime, securing the house, documenting the break-in, running whatever leads they had. The deeper backstory, the tunnels, whoever had built this life underneath our street, wasn't really their priority, and I couldn't blame them for that, but I needed to understand it. Partly for safety, and partly, I think, just to feel like I had some kind of control over a situation that had made me feel powerless in my own home. I started with the neighbors. Most of them had moved to the street around the same time we had, or a few years before, but there was one house near the end of the block that had been there longer than any of the others. A small, well-kept bungalow belonging to an elderly man named Walt, who I'd only really talked to a handful of times. Mostly waves across the street or brief exchanges about lawn care. I knocked on his door on a Tuesday afternoon, not entirely sure what I was going to ask him. Walt invited me in for coffee, and once I explained roughly what had been happening, leaving out some of the more unsettling details, at first, his expression shifted from polite curiosity to something more careful. A lot of the older houses on this street, he said, including yours, were built with basement access down to an old drainage tunnel. Storm system, mostly, helped route water off this street during bad weather, back before the city updated things. Unofficially, the story always was that delivery men used it to move coal between houses in the winter, so they didn't have to haul it through the snow door to door. He said the city had supposedly sealed most of those tunnel connections back in the 80s when they modernized the drainage system, but he'd always heard some of the seals were done cheap and never really held. Then he told me the part that stuck with me longest. He said the family who lived in our house before the people we bought it from, not the sellers themselves, but the family before them, had a son. A troubled kid, Walt said, someone who used to disappear for days at a time as a teenager. There'd been a rumor back then, treated by most of the neighborhood as a strange local legend more than anything serious, that he used to sneak through the tunnel system to visit, or spy on, other houses on the street. Walt half remembered the name, Curtis, maybe, or Cutler. He wasn't sure anymore. He said the family had moved away abruptly sometime in the early 2000s, and nobody had really talked about it since. I left Walt's house more disturbed than reassured. If this was the same person, and something about the careful, practiced way that figure had moved through our basement on the camera footage made me think it might be, then whoever was down in that tunnel system wasn't a stranger discovering it recently. They might have grown up in it. They might know it better than any adult alive, driven by that and by a growing, restless need to be doing something instead of just reacting to whatever happened next. I went looking for more. I found an old digitized municipal map in a local library's online archive, dated sometime in the 70s, showing a rough sketch of the storm and utility tunnel routes running under our street. I printed it out and spent an evening at the kitchen table with a highlighter, matching old markings to the current addresses on our block. The same organized instinct that used to just show up in my grocery lists, now aimed at something considerably darker. My house connected to at least two other basements nearby, based on the old lines. It wasn't just under my street, it was under my neighbors' houses too. There was a storm drain access point marked on the map, a heavy iron grate set into the curb a few houses down, the kind of thing most people walk past 100 times without a second look. One evening, telling Renee I was just going out for a walk to clear my head, I went to look at it myself. I want to be honest that I wasn't entirely sure what I expected to find. Some kind of proof, maybe. Something concrete enough to hand the police that would make them treat this the way I was starting to, as an ongoing, deliberate pattern, rather than a couple of unrelated incidents. I crouched near the great phone flashlight angled down into the dark below it, trying to make out anything at all through the narrow gaps in the iron. And that's when I heard footsteps behind me, close, fast on the sidewalk. I turned in time to see a shape, a person, thin, moving quick and low, break from the shadow along the side of a neighboring house and disappear into the narrow gap between two backyard fences before I could get any real look at them. My whole body wanted to chase. Every instinct screamed at me to run after that gap in the fences, but some smaller. Colder part of my brain caught up in time to stop me. I didn't actually know if this person was dangerous in a way I could handle alone, and running into an unfamiliar dark space after dark chasing adrenaline instead of sense was exactly the kind of decision that gets people hurt in stories like this one. I stood there instead, heart slamming, staring at the gap between the fences until I was sure nothing else was going to move. Then I walked home fast, checking behind me the whole way, and let myself in through a door I'd triple-checked was locked that morning. I told Renee everything that night, all of it in one long, unbroken conversation at the kitchen table after Mia had gone to bed. Walt's story, the map, the storm drain, the figure disappearing between the fences. I watched her go through something similar to what I imagine I'd gone through weeks earlier, disbelief curdling into fear as the pieces added up in front of her. She was upset with me, and she had every right to be, upset that I'd gone out alone that night without telling her where, scared by how deep this had turned out to go. But underneath the frustration, something else happened too. We came back together as a team in a way we hadn't been in weeks, because it had become obvious, finally, to both of us, that carrying this alone hadn't helped either of us. It had just made me more tired, more paranoid, and it had left her out of a decision that affected all three of us. We settled on a plan that night, the two of us, at the kitchen table with cold coffee between us. First, Renee and Mia would go stay with Renee's sister for a few days, get some distance while things got sorted, while I stayed close enough to deal with whatever came next. Second, I'd take everything I had, the map, Walt's account, the footage, straight to the detective's office myself, and push them to see this as one continuous pattern instead of a string of separate, minor incidents. I want to say clearly that I wasn't trying to be a hero. I'd already had one reckless night with a bat in my hand and another crouched alone by a storm drain, and both times I'd been lucky more than smart. The right move, the one that actually made sense, was to hand everything I had to people with more resources than me and let them do their job, while I did whatever I could to keep my family safe in the meantime. With the map and Walt's account added to the file, the case moved differently. A detective was assigned, someone who specialized in patterns of break-ins across that part of the city, and when I laid everything out for her, she didn't look at me the way I'd half expected, like I was an overwhelmed homeowner seeing conspiracies in dust. She told me actually that there'd been a handful of similar, previously unconnected reports scattered through the neighborhood over the past year. Missing food here, small items moved or taken there. One report 2 streets over, of someone finding an old bedroll shoved into an unused crawlspace behind a water heater. No one had tied any of it together until my footage and the old map gave them a reason to. A search team went into the tunnel system through the street grate a few days later, with proper lighting, radios, and police supervision. I waited outside with Renee, who'd come back for the day to be there with me, watching officers disappear one by one down into the dark beneath our street. It's a strange, specific kind of waiting, hoping this finally ends, and afraid in a different way of what ending might actually look like. They didn't find a person that day. Whoever had been living down there, moving through those tunnels for who knows how long, was gone by the time the team went in, likely scared off by all the recent activity. But deeper in the system, further than the crawlspace under my own house, they found another camp, better organized than the one behind my coal chute. Old photographs, several clearly taken through windows of houses in the neighborhood, at night from outside. A few children's drawings, faded and old, the kind that had clearly been kept, not taken recently, and a battered spiral notebook, worn soft at the corners, filled with handwriting. The detective let me see portions of that notebook later, once they'd gone through it themselves. Some of the entries referenced our house specifically, and she thought, correctly, that I'd want to see them rather than just be told about them secondhand. The handwriting shifted throughout, sometimes careful and small, sometimes scrawled fast and hard enough to tear the page. Some entries were dated, most weren't. Reading it felt like reading years compressed into a single object, which, as it turned out, it was, what the notebook made clear. And what the detective later confirmed through records, the police were able to piece together, was that the person living in those tunnels was almost certainly Waltz Curtis, or Cutler, grown into a man now in his 30s, who had apparently never fully left the neighborhood the way everyone had assumed when his family moved away. Fragments of the notebook suggested years spent in and out of institutions, and temporary housing, cut off from a family that hadn't kept in touch. Drifting eventually back to the one place that had ever felt like his, the tunnel system beneath his childhood home and the houses connected to it. Entries described watching different families move through that house over the years since his own family left. Not with anything the notebook stated outright as violent intent, but with a kind of fixated, lonely resentment, writing about each family almost as though he still considered part of the house his own, sad and bitter, about being replaced by people who had no idea he existed. There were entries about us specifically, about hearing Mia's laughter through the floor vents on the days she played downstairs, about the smell of Renee's cooking drifting into the crawlspace on nights she made something with a lot of garlic, about my own late-night pacing. The nights I couldn't sleep even before any of this started, which he'd apparently interpreted. And this is the detail that unsettled me the most, that still comes back to me sometimes at night, as evidence that I too felt like something was wrong with the house. Like we had that much in common, reading that did something strange to me. It wasn't monstrous, what I found on those pages. It was mundane and human and deeply sad, and that made it worse in its own way. A man broken by isolation, clinging to a distorted, one-sided sense of connection to a family who had never known he was there. The final confrontation, when it came, wasn't what I'd braced myself for. It happened about a week after the tunnel search, while Renee and Mia were still staying at her sister's. I went back to the house alone during the day to grab a few more of our things, clothes, some of Mia's books, the charger she kept forgetting. I told myself it was safe. Daylight, coal chute sealed, cameras up. I remember genuinely believing that. I was upstairs pulling clothes from Mia's dresser when I heard movement above me. No, not above me, in her room, from somewhere, near the closet, which made no sense at all. Because as far as any of us knew, there was no tunnel connection anywhere near that part of the house. My whole body went cold and still in a way I don't think I can fully describe. I reached for my phone to call for help, and then instead found myself moving toward the sound, slow, careful, my pulse in my ears. He was standing near the window, holding an old Polaroid camera that had belonged to Renee's mother, one of those family heirlooms that had ended up on Mia's shelf more as decoration than a working camera. He was holding it the way you'd hold something you didn't quite understand, turning it slightly, and for a second, just a second, he didn't look dangerous at all. He looked lost. I didn't attack him. I want to be honest that some part of that was instinct, and some part of it was that the way he stood there, confused, almost childlike, made it very hard to feel the kind of rage I might have expected to feel in that moment. Instead, I said something, I don't even remember exactly what, something like, hey, you need to go. Careful, not shouting. He startled and started talking, fast and disjointed, something about the room used to being his, about hearing kids laughing through the floor, and thinking, for a second, that maybe it was him, remembering being a kid in that same room a long time ago. It wasn't threatening. It was heartbreaking, honestly, in a way I hadn't expected walking in. But when I mentioned the police, something shifted in him instantly, panic pure and immediate, and he pushed past me and ran not toward the sealed basement like I'd have guessed, but toward a gap behind the closet. I genuinely never noticed a second smaller access point that led down into the wall space and connected, we'd later learn, back down to the original tunnel system. Missed entirely during the ceiling work because nobody had thought to check anywhere outside the basement. I didn't chase him. I'd learned that lesson already, twice over, and this time I let it hold. I called the police immediately, told them exactly where he'd gone, and waited outside the house at a careful distance, watching until they arrived. It took 2 more days for them to catch him, working with utility crews to physically block off connecting points in the tunnel system one section at a time, corner him gradually instead of letting him vanish into a network none of them fully understood. He was taken into custody without anyone getting hurt, which mattered to me more than I expected it to. This was never supposed to be some action movie ending. It was always just a long, uncomfortable unraveling of something sad and real. Renee and Mia moved back home about a week after that, once the tunnel access points, all of them, including the one behind the closet, had been sealed properly this time, with real permits and real inspections, not paint and good intentions. Slowly, the house started to feel like ours again. I kept the security cameras up permanently. I don't think I'll ever take them down. Mia took longer than the house did to feel normal. We ended up moving her to a different bedroom on the other side of the house, something I suggested gently, without fully explaining why, because I didn't want her carrying any more weight from this than she already had. I think about the notebook more than I expected to. There's a strange, uncomfortable mix of relief and pity that hasn't fully gone away, and I don't know what to do with it, honestly. I expected to hate him once it was over, the way you're supposed to hate whoever put your family through something like that. I don't, not entirely. What I found in those pages wasn't someone who set out to hurt us. It was someone broken by years of being alone, clinging to the only thing that had ever felt like home, and watching a family live a life he thought should have still been his. Months later, doing a routine sweep of the basement, fully sealed now, cameras humming quietly overhead, everything as safe as it's ever going to be, I noticed a second set of footprints in a thin layer of dust near the laundry area. Smaller than the ones from before, a completely different shape. My stomach dropped instantly, the old fear surging back up whole, and for one long, ugly moment I thought it was starting again. It turned out to belong to a neighborhood kid who'd snuck in through an unlocked side window on a dare after hearing rumors from other kids at school about the tunnel house, which is what we are now, apparently, local legend. A story other people's children tell each other at sleepovers. I felt a strange, tired kind of relief standing there, relief that this time the explanation really was as mundane as it looked. But there was a quieter thought underneath it, one I didn't say out loud to Renee that night or any night since. I still check the basement floor every single time I go down there. Out of habit, I tell myself. And I don't think, if I'm honest with myself, that I'll ever fully stop.